Oh, hi. I didn't see you there. I was too busy immersed in the history of ERP. It took a shocking amount of effort to digitize enterprise resource planning. Today, standing up an ERP solution can feel like digging the Panama Canal, but with more stakeholder meetings and hopefully somewhat fewer casualties, but that depends on if it's a migration or greenfield. It's a big lift because it matters. Getting this wrong is a surefire way to get fired, surely. When it works, it's invisible. When it doesn't work, well, you'll hear about it. Take Target, for example. Back in 2013, Target began opening stores in Canada and people were ecstatic. Who doesn't love a Target run? But it wasn't all rosy.
The big U.S. retailer announced today it is shuttering its Canadian stores, 133 of them, and throwing in the towel and throwing 17,000 people out of work.
That's right. Within 2 years, Target turned tail and retreated to Minneapolis, leaving a department store-shaped hole in the Canadian retail landscape at the cost of billions in losses. Not a good look for anyone, and President of Target Canada, well, not a great job to have. I hope he polished up his resume. Incidentally, he does seem to be doing fine, but he's not a corporate executive anymore. He's doing his own thing since 2016, and it seems to be going pretty well, so good for him. I bet his ERP investment is pretty solid now. So why did Target fail? Well, it's the tale that launched 1,000 MBA case studies, and I'm sure it's multi-causal. One might speculate that there were many stakeholders in a complicated post-recession retail environment. The nature of the Canadian market was, of course, distinct from the market that Target was used to. Nobody could have predicted what would happen. It was very complicated. Oh, what's this? Well, I'm being told that it was actually ERP. Okay, then. That's right. A poor ERP implementation was largely to blame for Target's failure in what could have been a gigantic market. It turns out that managing inventory for 133 stores across a country as large as Canada is a gargantuan task, and that implementing an ERP solution that can handle this rollout quickly and with as little pain as possible isn't exactly an easy thing to do either. The Target Canada team was tasked with standing up and populating an SAP instance from scratch, and well, they weren't able to get it exactly right. According to one employee who was there and spoke with Canadian Business Magazine, you name it, it was wrong. Bad data screwed up the supply chain. A lack of experienced merchandisers and administrators compounded the problem. They had no automated ability to detect errors, and the amount of manual work was staggering. All of this, and the shelves stayed empty. Consumers don't have a lot of patience, and within a couple of years, the whole operation was wound down. In short, ERP matters. Target isn't even atypical, by the way. In our research, we found that roughly half of ERP implementations fail, and that's a low estimate. So what should you do to end up on the right side of all of this? The first lesson is that while it's enabled by technology, ERP implementation cannot be an IT project. In the Target case, merchandisers weren't properly inputting data. That's a process issue, not a technology issue, and could only be solved at the business level. Unfortunately, resolution came too late and was incomplete. This means creating a holistic view of the enterprise to facilitate information flow across multiple business units seamlessly. Say that 5 times fast. Which is really what ERP solutions are designed to do. That big picture view is a bit cliche. Anyone ever tell you to ignore context? Yeah, well, you should probably ignore them. But it can be the difference between a thriving business and an abandoned anchor store. So we're going to keep saying it until people finally listen to us. And that's worth expanding on a little bit. Something might seem obvious, like involve all necessary stakeholders or whatever, but it's not always easy to do. Clarifying goals, aligning drivers to features and capabilities, getting the right stakeholders involved, this is all actually pretty hard. But once you do it, you can pull everything together into an actionable roadmap, laying the groundwork for a successful ERP implementation that will keep you happy, for a while at least. All right, let's visualize this for you. We love a good wheel here at Infotech, and ERP is no exception. On this map, you're here, at the strategy level. Align your organizational goals, business needs, and technology drivers to lay the foundations of your ERP implementation. Then, you'll want to gather requirements and select a vendor to provide your ERP. If you're big enough, you might consider doing this in-house, but that's becoming pretty rare these days. It's very easy to mess things up at this point. You'll want to make sure you've got the right people in the room to really nail down your requirements, or else you'll end up buying the wrong thing, and a few years down the line, your vendors and implementers will release statements blaming the failed implementation on you. Then, you'll actually want to implement your ERP. Easier said than done, I know. You'll likely work with a partner to do this, since hopefully it isn't a regular thing. Target Canada made some mistakes here, and you can learn from them. Get the details right. You'll be grateful you did. The fun doesn't stop there, though. Once you've implemented, it's time to optimize. Make sure you're monitoring your environment, keeping tabs on key metrics, and iterating where you can. Then you can transition to operations. Running your new ERP system will require effort, of course, but it's less a project at this point and more of an operational responsibility. Keep this up with a view to dynamic improvement and you should be golden. Easy enough, right? To explain how to do this most effectively, let's talk to an expert. I'm joined by practice lead Robert Fail in our enterprise applications practice here at Infotech, and he is our aforementioned ERP expert. Welcome, Robert.
Thank you for having me, Jeremy.
So my first question for you has to do with sort of the longevity of this ERP problem, for lack of a better word. So in that book that I referred to that I was holding at the beginning of this video, that covers SAP from about 1972 to say 1997. There was enough time to write about this one ERP company back in the 90s before the dot-com bubble burst. So why is this so hard even today? You'd think that we'd have gotten pretty good at that?
So we have gotten better. The issue is that ERPs aren't changed very often. So it's not something you can get good at because you, as an organization, using one, you only do it once every, it used to be 10, 20 years. It's getting less now. So it's one of those things that you don't do often enough to be great at. Now, you would hope that the partner and the vendor you're working with would get better, and they are, but there's always challenges because now it's not a technology problem. It used to be a technology problem because we're doing things for the first time. Now it's mostly a people problem. And as we know, people are messy.
Okay, so let's talk about that. Let's dig in on this people problem bit a little bit. So in the intro to this video and this interview, I talked a little bit about Target Canada and how their merchandisers were relatively inexperienced, and so they weren't inputting proper information into the ERP system, and that cascaded into sort of a broader organizational failure. So when you say people problem, is that the sort of thing you're referring to? Inexperienced folks doing the wrong things? Is it a strategic issue? Is it a skill problem? What do you see happening out there?
It's actually all of those. And it's different for every organization, which is why people can't come in with a template and say, you will do this, and it will work. That's why at Infotech, we have a framework which helps people figure out what works for them. And that's the important one is every organization says we're unique, therefore we have to customize our ERP, which is not true. They're not unique as a business, but their people are unique. So that's the important thing, is that they have to figure out what to do as an organization that works for them to get where they want to go.
So if I'm a CIO, let's say, and I've been tasked with standing up a new ERP or transitioning off an old one or something like that, what are some questions that I should be asking of my people to make sure that I'm prepared to make that transition?
So the first question is, as the CIO, is the business committed and engaged? If the answer is no, then stop. Because this is not an IT system, this is a business system. And without the business being engaged and committed, your likelihood of success is very low. And that's often a problem, is that people think, oh, it's an IT system. Business, we'll just wait until the IT sets it up and we're all good. No, these are business processes, business systems that need business support.
So how do I articulate the value then to the business? Because I imagine that they'll think of it in a lot of cases as a technology platform, right? As a technology project, you know? You're my chief information officer, deal with my enterprise apps, you know? Come back to me when it's done. Here are my high-level requirements. How do I get them bought in, and who do I need to get bought in?
You need all senior management definitely engaged, and the leaders of all the departments within the organization, because they're the ones who understand the business. And the way to get them engaged, and this is part of our methodology, is start with, what are the organizational goals? Okay, we have those, whatever they are. Usually they're on a website or a piece of paper somewhere in the organization. And you say, how will or how does the ERP support each of these organizational goals? And by changing it, how are we going to accelerate those goals? Because ultimately, the ERP is a tool to help the business achieve their goals.
So when I think about enterprise resource planning sort of as a concept, and maybe this is incorrect of me, I sort of have an infrastructure background, so maybe a little bit less interacting with the business, although good infrastructure leaders would tell you that shouldn't be true. When I think about ERP, I think of it as sort of a series of roles, like a racy sort of matrix, if you will. And there are some things that the business does. So they're going to do things like input dimensions for shipping and, you know, input invoices and pay the invoices. And there are some things that IT does that would sort of roll up into the CIO's purview, for lack of a better word. So I know that a lot of the audience of this video is going to be folks sort of in IT leadership positions. And so while we know they need to get the business on board, what are they going to have to do once they have the business on board?
So the important one for a CIO is the CIO should basically never know the ERP is there. It should just work. It should be like your network. You don't worry about it unless it breaks. ERP is the same. It's about supporting the business. And IT, really all they're doing is providing the keep the lights on work and making sure that the business has all the resources it needs to optimize the business processes, which might mean having a BA or something who then works with them to understand how they can reconfigure the ERP. But it's not an IT system. It's a business system. And ultimately it comes down to is the business has to decide how the processes are going to be optimized. What data do they need accessible? And then that would be IT's job to make sure that they have the knowledge and the availability of the data they need to drive business decisions. But it's just an enablement piece. It's a partnership. But there's very little work that is driven by IT.
So is there an opportunity here to be transformational as a CIO? So we've said that there's very little that's driven by IT, fair enough. But maybe some CIOs say, wow, this is the biggest thing that I'm going to be tasked with probably ever in my role as a CIO. Like, is there a spin that I can bring to it that'll really enhance that business value? Or is it really just about executing sort of as a matter of degree rather than kind?
There's still an education piece, and you need to work with the business to partner with them to help them understand that this is not a static system, that they're able to change the configuration and work with the data to make it better over time. The business does not stay static. And I think this is where a lot of people go make a mistake with an ERP, is they think it's installed, it's done, we're good for another 10 years. But your business isn't static. It can change as over a year, over 6 months, over 3 months. Just look at the chaos in the last few weeks. In that the business had to partner with IT to figure out what the situation was to change the system to support the tariffs that have been going on. And this is something that is very topical. It's a business problem, but it has to be supported with IT. And with the right ERP, people were, some of the ERP's owners that I've talked to recently at a conference, they had stuff done in 6 hours to support the changes, but they worked with the business to make sure it got done. In an old system, it could have been days, if not months, to do the work to make these changes. And this is why you need to make sure that the business is set up with a flexible and adaptable system. And that's the piece that a CIO can bring is, hey, we have a system, it works, but it's not very flexible. Think of it like built out of wood as opposed to mechano. You can take the wood apart, but it's a lot less easy to work with than mechano, where you can take it apart and rebuild it.
Been a long time since I've heard of mechano.
That's true. It does date me.
I appreciate it nonetheless. So a couple of thoughts on this, right? We've talked about sort of dynamism and adaptability, and I think we can all agree that that's an important aspect, right, of a good ERP implementation. But there's also this challenge of sort of customizability versus configurability. And so, of course, we know that a massively customized system is going to be much harder to implement and maintain than something that looks a little bit more like the off-the-shelf solution. So how do you strike that balance? How customizable should it be? And is it IT's role to push back if there are too many requests? How should they handle that?
100% IT should push back on customization. These days, ERP is a commodity product. It's no different than milk or eggs. You know, you can pick one. It's probably going to meet 80% of your needs. And that's why it's a commodity product, because you can pick A, B, or C. It will do the basics that you need. It's that 20% that is unique to your organization. But that's why you want to pick the right ERP that has the niche functionality that you're looking for. So if you're a manufacturer, you can go get a generic ERP that can be configured and customized to meet the needs of manufacturing. But why would you do that? Why would you not select an ERP that meets the needs specifically and focused on the business processes of your manufacturing business? And that's why you would pick something that is set up specifically for manufacturing as opposed to picking the generic one. Why customize, which, as you say, is going to add costs and expense, not as just in the initial setup, but ongoing, because you have to maintain that throughout the life of the system.
Let's talk about technical debt for a moment. Every time I've ever been involved in an ERP implementation, or even somebody rumbling about maybe potentially switching their ERP, the issue of technical debt has been pretty significant, right? And so what I mean by that is we're several versions back. We have a very unique way of calculating pricing that the vendor didn't anticipate. We're going to have to do a staged transition to a new ERP, and that's going to be expensive. The business doesn't get it because it works right now. How do you overcome that technical debt? And are there cases where you just declare technical bankruptcy in front of a technical bankruptcy judge?
So this is where the challenge is people who are on-premise, because you had to have an on-premise system that allowed you to have your own unique instance that you could then customize. And this is the promise of cloud, is that once you're there, you cannot really customize your software. You can extend it by accessing the system through approved APIs. So not customization, extension. And this gives you the ability and flexibility. One, the ability to stay up to date, and the flexibility to do your unique and strange pieces without impacting the system and generating constant cost for yourself.
So this whole time, as we've been talking, there's sort of been this underlying assumption, correct me if I'm wrong, that you're going to have a partner and a vendor and an implementer who are going to help you and facilitate this transition. Is that the case? Are you always going to end up with an implementation partner, or do people do this themselves?
So this comes down to scale and complexity. So if you're a small or medium business, the amount of uniqueness that you have is probably not enough that you're going to go really off the board on your ERP. You might just need core finance. Hey, I need to be able to do my books, send out an invoice, that sort of thing. There's no customization, there's no support. You could get a cloud vendor, sign up for your cloud account, pay your $50 a month or whatever. That's it. You enter your information, no support needed. That's for the very small business. As you move into a higher tier, you're going to have a partner who's going to help you with understanding all the options and which ones you want to configure for yourself. But eventually, once the system's up and running, there's not going to be a lot of interaction. It comes down to is as you grow in size and become more enterprise-like, that you need help understanding the complexity of the system, all the interactions, and you start needing add-ons. A manufacturing system, think about that, is that you need a manufacturing execution system, which is digital twin of the factory floor. The factory floor itself is a complex system. Now you have a digital twin that has to interact back to your ERP. You need specialists, which is why you want to partner with a vendor or a system integrator or both. Ultimately, you want your ecosystem around your ERP to be a partnership so that you all are committed to success. And that's truly what a partnership is finding someone who's not just transactional, I'll install it and I'll charge you money to keep it going. That's very transactional. That's not what you want in a partner, which is why for our research, we actually have a blueprint on selecting an ERP implementation partner. Because one, it's understanding who you are, so you can find a partner that's compatible with the way you work, but also building that relationship. Because really, when you're selecting an implementation partner, it's kind of like dating. It's just an enterprise dating app is really what you're working towards, and building that long-term relationship, because you are going to have your ERP for a couple of years.
And that's why Accenture swiped left on me. Okay. So this all sounds very well and good, Rob. I appreciate it, but obviously people are still making mistakes. So what are some things that people get wrong when they're looking to implement a new ERP system?
One of the things we often get is in our overall methodology, we start with strategy and we go into selection and implementation. People skip the strategy piece. They go into selection, which is they start thinking about requirements. And they don't think about what they need in the future. They think about, what do we currently have? So they start designing the system to work the way the system they already have is. So they get stuck on things that are details. And this is why we always back them up to strategy, to talk about business capabilities and outcomes, and focusing on going back to business goals. How are the business capabilities and outcomes you're looking for going to drive business goals? That's not, I need a customer number of 20 characters. That is, I need the ability to track a customer to drive revenue, business capabilities, not requirements.
So when we think about the Infotech methodology, then is there anything sort of special as to how we would do this versus how somebody else might?
Absolutely. So the first thing we do is we're not talking requirements. First of all, the most important thing is the scope and the business alignment. In fact, I tell people when they come in and talk to us, they say, okay, we need to work on requirements. No, we need to make sure the business is engaged and committed, and they understand that this is a business system, not an IT system. IT is there to partner with them to get the right business system in place. That's the first step. So we talk about things like vision. What's the vision for the project? Because ultimately, your implementation is going to be 12 to 15 to 18 months longer in some of those enterprise systems. Going back to SAP, that can be a 3-year implementation. What do you think people are going to ask during all that time? Why am I doing this? And that's why you want the vision statement, to answer why. Why are we doing this? And the vision will be, as a business, this is what we want to accomplish. And this will be supported by a flexible, adaptable ERP system. The other thing we do is talk about guide rails, or guiding principles, which is what are the arguments we know we're going to have as we go forward, and how do we shortcut those? One of the ones we always recommend is using the system as it's designed. In other words, limit customization. Basically start with no customization and work backwards from there. And that's one of those, because you know it's going to come up. Hey, well, we just customize it. No, let's re-examine our business outcome and our business process and determine whether we can actually use the system as designed. And then from there, we go into business capabilities and understanding ultimately, what do you do as a business? What are your differentiators? In other words, where do your business processes make you unique? And finally, help people understand that that's going to be a long process to get to the end, because it's not we're done in 3 months. This is a 1 to 2 year long process.
I literally can't go get a burrito without an AI-enabled application helping me with the burrito. So I imagine that enterprise apps like SAP and Oracle and all of these have some sort of AI functionality. What do you think of that? Is it useful? How should CIOs think about it?
The challenge is, like your ERP, you shouldn't even know what's there. And a good ERP is the one you don't know is part of your system, because you're looking at a business process. The ERP is just feeding that business process and optimizing it for you. AI in an ERP should be doing the same thing. How does it make my job easier? And it could be it's machine learning. One of the ERP vendors has had a machine learning algorithm piece of software for years that you would allow it to mine your Outlook. And it would say, hey, I found an email to this customer. You spent an hour composing the email. Do you want me to add that to your time billing? That is just machine learning, but that's the and then it's gone from there. Another vendor last year, they were talking about one of their customers had grown by acquisition, and they had manufacturing organizations across the world. They had 10,000 SKUs, stock keeping units, so products in their database. And they realized there was a lot of duplication, and it was taking hours for people to find products. So they did an analysis. They said it was going to be 12 people for 7.5 years to manually resolve that.
That's a lot.
With Gen AI and 3 people, they did it in 6 months. They're saving €1 million a year just on product lookups. Like, those are the things. Is it part of the system? Is it all part of the daily tasks? No. But it's available and can help solve some business problems. And ultimately, that's what you want out of AI in an ERP is, how is it going to solve my business problems? I don't want it because I can go and tell all my customers I've got AI. They don't care. They just want their products shipped or their services delivered. How do they get that better, faster? Is through the use and application of AI.
Fantastic. All right. Well, that was Rob Fail, who is a practice lead in our enterprise applications practice here at Infotech. Thank you so much for joining me today, Rob.
Well, thank you for having me.
For more on ERP and other great research topics, check out infotech.com.